going to be in the first part of chapter 12. Last week I had way too much material, although I think it was fine that we did it in one lump sum because it was all one thought of all those people and what faith means. And if you ever get into a discussion with somebody about what faith is, it's a great chapter to show that faith involves a response. It involves obedience. It involves trusting God in what He has asked us to do. And those are important things, processes to take and all of that. So anyway, there's a QR code for those people online to see a little bit more detailed notes in case they don't have notes. I send a link out in my email that I send out. So anyway, well, let's just talk about discipline. I guess what I was going to say is that tonight, very few scriptures, only 13, so it's going to seem like not many, but I think we've got a lot to talk about, and it will be helpful to talk about. Chapter 11 kind of starts more of a practical application. If it was a sermon, it's kind of argumentation, you might say, in a large part up to chapter 12. Up to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is examples and illustration. And then chapter 12 to the end is exhortation. This is the preacher winding down and saying, this is what it means for you to live out what God has asked you to do. It's kind of points that are there. And in light of their wanting to go back to the old way, I think for some of them, it just didn't feel like Christianity, as good as it sounded, it just didn't feel like it was what God wanted because they were going through difficulties. And when you think about it, they went from Jewish people who were very well respected to these Christians that were seemed rebellious, going their own way. And whenever they would look around and they would see fellow Christians dying because of their faith, that doesn't feel right, does it? It just doesn't. Your conscience kind of tells you we're doing something wrong here. It was much better back there when we didn't have all kinds of attention. So anyway, God says, or the Hebrew writer, the Hebrew preacher here is saying, this is God working on all of us, and suffering is a part of Christianity. So now we're to the idea of talking about discipline. How many of you like discipline? You probably enjoyed the military, didn't you? Discipline is a good thing.
Looking back, the way made it.
Yes, there you go. Discipline is good for us, isn't it? The Hebrew writer says at the time it doesn't feel pleasant, but it is what's good for us. And aren't we glad our kids went to school and the teachers could discipline them and help them get along in the right way? Bible class teachers. That's the reason why, as a church, we need preachers that teach the word and encourage us and motivate us, because sometimes we have a tendency to get comfortable and lazy and all of that. Sometimes, though, we have to get creative with our discipline. We tell some stories about how we discipline our kids, but we learn from other people who are experts in raising kids. Some of our good friends, in fact, their grandson has been coming the last 2 summers to church here while he works at Tinker. But anyway, whenever their dad was in, I think probably junior high, maybe high school, but probably junior high, they would shoot spit wads through a thing, and hit other kids on the bus. And they got in trouble for it. So the dad decided, and the mom decided that because the brother was encouraging, that they would spend their afternoons for a week or so, that they would do that for hours. And you can imagine what it would be like after doing all those spit wads. You would get thirsty and the cheering on and all of that. So that was creative discipline. And they were good at that kind of stuff. So we learned some of that. So I'm sorry, that's why our kids are a little different.
The grandkids are turning out great though.
Yes, yeah, the next generation is much better for it, so. But discipline, did you guys ever get in trouble in school? No. I know it's hard to believe, but I got a spanking in first grade. Did you have a confession you want to make? Oh, you just raised your hand, yeah.
I got in trouble. I dropped a pencil.
Oh, okay.
It was planned. Everybody that dropped a pencil at that time had to write sentences.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Remember writing sentences, just page after page after page? That would be cruel and unusual punishment nowadays, wouldn't it?
Good old days when it was legal.
Yeah. Dale?
English teacher throwing an eraser at me.
An English teacher threw an eraser at?
I was talking
Yeah, okay.
on the back.
Nowadays, that would get that teacher kicked out of school rather than you. Discipline is good for us, though. Whether it's the traffic laws, whether it's the laws of property laws, relationship laws. I'm sure you can find some exceptions, but most of them are really good for us. They're helpful for us. They're helpful for society.
Wait until your dad gets home.
Wait until your dad gets home. Yeah, that was the worst punishment of all, wasn't it? You'd kind of be outside about that time when your dad was getting home. My mom was one of these. She loved to use a belt to give whippings, and sometimes she would grab the end without the metal, and the other was on the other end. That would make you change your mind. But she would be working in the beauty shop, or we turned our garage into a beauty shop. She'd be working on somebody's hair, and we would get into trouble. I know I was an angel. My brothers were real bad. But she would come in and she was so frustrated with us, and I'm thankful for that. My dad was different. We worked on the farm, and he would just make us do more work. And so that probably shaped me more than anything. So discipline, we don't like it, but it is good for us. I joke about the military, but you're right, it does turn out good people. And discipline is good for us. So we're coming out of chapter 11 into chapter 12, and Frank is going to read verses 1 through 6 for us. Ken's coming with the microphone. I put an outline up on the screen, but you can follow along reading verses 1 through 6.
Therefore, we also, since we are all surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who by the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged from your soul. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. And these are the exhortations. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives.
All right. That is kind of spaced out is a quote out of the Old Testament. That is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11 through 12. Kind of gives us a divine viewpoint of this discipline. As Christians, we need discipline, and we do that with through teaching, and to help that way. We, I guess you could say, it's making disciples. And what should our focus be on? I think a couple of things. What should our focus be on out of this passage?
God loves us.
God loves us? Okay.
He loves us so much that he did.
Okay.
Keeping our eyes on Jesus.
Keeping our eyes on Jesus.
We're surrounded by so many witnesses.
Yes, there, after Larry gave his intro, I thought, yeah, there's three, so. You're right. Following up, chapter 11 is this great cloud of witnesses. Um, Sometimes people make this into the thought of, well, cloud kind of refers to a group of people, but sometimes people will think this is how we're living, and all those things that have gone on before us are cheering us on, and you might think about that, but I don't think that is really the real focus. It's this example that they live through difficult times. Yes, Frank?
One thing that stands out, it says that we've endured some hostilities in our lives, but for Jesus, Lord, consider him who endured such hostilities from sinners against himself.
Yeah. And so they're going through this time and they're seeing other Christians persecuted for their faith. And Jesus shed his blood, they have. And I guess this is putting it into perspective, but you've not shed blood. You've not gotten to that point, the shedding of blood for your faith in God. But you're right, that Jesus, think about Jesus, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, and so you don't grow weary. Jesus experienced that same thing that they're experiencing. So don't grow weary and lose heart. Again, a tie-in with the rest of the book, and the real issue he's trying to help them do is not give up. When bad things happen to us, when we're new converts, we want to give up, don't we? As we get older, we have, well, I shouldn't say we want to, but we have a tendency to. As we get older, our track record for our faith and the history and the repeated experiences, we know God will get us through this difficulty to a better place. So we're confident of that. But they were younger Christians, so they had that as a challenge. Kind of going back to the very first word, therefore, or the so, or in order, that whole kind of concept. Looking back at chapter 11, this is how we should respond. We have this great cloud of witnesses, these great examples of faith, and so he ties in then this idea of the Olympics, the games, the races that they ran, and it's always amazing how people run in very little, don't they? Not too many people run in a lot of heavy clothes. When our son was a teenager, when Patrick was a teenager, he wanted one of these weighted vests to be able to be stronger. And I think the thing weighed like 20 pounds. And you think that doesn't add up to much, but it is a lot. And then you go out and run, and it makes your heart work harder, it makes your muscles work harder. But people who want to win a race take off things like that. They might use that in training, but when they get ready to run, they have these aerodynamic clothes and haircuts and shoes and everything else, so there's no resistance. They can run fast. They find the lightest shoes they can and all that, so they don't carry extra weight. But he also adds, and the sin that so easily entangles us. You ever worry about things and you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you just feel worn out when you get out of bed because you've got all these problems that are trying to solve. Sin's that way too. When you struggle with sin, it weighs you down, it discourages you. So he's telling them, run the race, and you need to find your sacrifice in Jesus, the one who died once and for all sins, so you can run freely and not be burdened down with that. Don't have worries, and certainly don't have sin, because it does easily entangle us. The devil finds that place that you feel a little bit guilty, and it just latches on you like a leech and just sucks the life out of you. So get rid of those sins and those extra things, those extra burdens, and then run a race with perseverance. a race marked out for us. And as you run, fix your eyes on Jesus. You have this, you can maybe hear all the crowd cheering, but fix your eyes on the finish line, which is Jesus. And two words that are pretty key, pioneer and perfecter. Pioneer is kind of the form of where we get our word architecture. He's the originator of our faith. He's the original focus for our faith. And he's also the one that perfects it, brings it to completion, to maturity, and develops our faith. And that takes time. And then for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. This is probably a really poor illustration. But mamas, when they're going to have babies, don't focus on the childbirth as much as they do that baby that's going to come. That joy. And because there's a prize at the end, they can endure the pain that childbirth has. And certainly the same thing is for us. We sing songs about heaven, and so we focus on the joy that's there, but we're not to heaven yet. We're living in a life that has difficulties and all of that. But for Jesus, he went to the cross knowing he could see you and me and all the people for generations and all tongues and tribes who were going to become Christians. So he went to the cross and endured it for you and me. Even though the cross was a symbol of shame and reproach and sin and evil and law breaking, that's how they punish criminals. He endured that, so he knew he could sit down at the cross. So consider him. Anything there I touched on that you want to explore a little bit more?
Keeping his commandments.
Keeping his commandments, okay. They're good for us, aren't they?
Oh, they're common sense.
Yeah. They help us know that we're keeping the things that God wants us to.
Yeah, but who are the witnesses?
Who are the witnesses? All those people in chapter 11, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's what he's transitioning from. Here's a bunch of illustrations. You know, today we would put it up on a slide and have pictures of all these people. Then we had Moses and we'd have Abraham. And
Who are they today?
I think the same people. I think there's the same examples for us. We would add probably the apostles and the history that we have there who lived by faith. Peter, who was crucified upside down, what tradition tells us, and others that died.
What I'm getting into is sins that entangle us.
Okay.
Each one of us had to write down a list of things that we think that would apply to us. It would be massive, I think, myself included. I mean, I'm trying to see who I associate with. If they say, well, let's go get a Bud Light or something like that. I'll say, okay, that's good, you're my best friend. Well, that's the sin right there. That means to stay away from those people. Now, you can get down to the meat. I think you need to get down to every little thing that we do that we should not do.
Okay.
There's nothing, want to make it really bad, there's nothing we can do that would be good.
Yeah.
That's just making a statement to get a point over.
I'm talking to me.
Yeah. All right, Terry on the back row's got a comment there.
The great cloud of witnesses, I think also you can add your great heritage in your family, your parents, your grandparents, Bible class teachers, mentors that have taught you along and have gone on before you.
Good.
You want to follow along on what they've taught you also.
Yeah, very good. Ken.
I'm looking at this word, for the joy set before him in enduring the cross. I'm struggling with that word joy.
Uh-huh.
And I just remember the events as described what he endured. There's some there's some meaning there that I'm not picking up on.
I thought,
How
what-
could he be happy with that, enduring all that?
I thought what Kevin said is exactly correct. When we talk about witnesses, they are not witnesses of us. They are witnesses to us. And Jesus, the founder and the author of our faith, had a goal. And can you imagine how it must have been at least a bit satisfying to him, joyful to him, that some 2,000 years later, in a nation that nobody even knew about, there would be 100 people who would be sitting there talking about his death on the cross. And Jesus could see what we can't see. And he could know what we can't know. And he knew what heaven was like because he had been there. And I think those are the things that, for me, are important. The other thing, too, is he knew that he was satisfying his Father.
Yeah, and joy is different than probably pleasurable. Larry, were you gonna add something? Okay. I think about James, who says, count it all joy when you fall into manifold trials of temptation. Well, it's not fun to be tempted. Well, I guess there's the pleasures of sin for a season, but there's consequences to be paid over sin, and pleasure is one thing, but joy is more lasting, is a little deeper, or whatever. Roger, were you gonna say something a while ago?
Yeah, I don't feel like I've had any hardships. Now, maybe that's going a little too far. I mean, I've had struggles here and there and so forth, but I've never been persecuted for anything that I believed or anything that I said, not like the people that he's talking about here have been. And so it makes me wonder, have I ever been disciplined by the Lord? Does he really love me? Well, other scriptures in the Bible tell me that he does.
Right.
But, I've had it, we're all extremely rich. We have not had
Yes.
hardships, most of us, that really drag us down, make us suffer very much. And I just don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah, very good. I think part of that is kind of going back to the birth analogy. Now that you don't have the pain and you have the child, which sometimes that child is a pain, but because you were focused on that joy, those are all minor now. They may have been minor then because of the joy. We're going to heaven. And because of that joy, I'm not going to worry about a leaky pipe like I probably would have if I wasn't going to heaven.
But I made a comment to class Sunday that, I've had my sins in my life, and some people know some of those. But all in all, it's a joy to me to live the way that I do and not have to be a slave to all the sins that affect people.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's the joy.
Right.
Because I don't count it a burden at all to live the way I do.
Very good.
Well, I think what I'm seeing here, he's talking about the plan of salvation. In other words, Jesus came into the world for a purpose, right? And so the purpose was to provide the sacrifice for us so that we can have eternal life. We're lost without that. And so he's going to the cross and says, for the joy set before him. In other words, the opportunity that I have been put here to do, I'm going to get to complete that. I'm going to get to die on the cross so that all these people can live. If we could have a joy that, yes, I'll stop and pick up this hitchhiker, okay? My life is in danger, but the thing about it is this, when you do that, okay, there's a fulfillment there, there's a joy there. You're put here to help people. And so that's what I'm saying, is he's looking forward to this because that's what he came to do. And it's gonna be a joyful thing, even though it's gonna be very painful for him.
Very good, very good. Donna,
The humanness of Christ he said, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. And he said that at the foot of the cross. And so it wasn't an easy thing for him to do, but he was willing to do that because he was obedient to the Father.
yeah, and he does it, he lays down his life because he cares about his disciples, he tells them that. And no greater friend than we have, we don't have a greater friend than he who laid down his life for us.
I think there's 2 points to that. First of all, the physical point that Christ was going through, the pain and agony. But he also knew that he's going to be separated from his Father. And the spiritual point was so great, but he did not want to do all that. But he would do it because he loved his Father so much.
Mhm. Very good. Okay, they haven't resisted to the point of shedding of blood, and you have completely forgotten the word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son. And this is the point that Larry made early on. And, you know, we think that when our parents, I mean, do you guys remember being teenagers? When your parents disciplined you, it just really, it felt like they were mean, didn't it?
This hurts me more than it hurts you.
And I realize that there are people who are abused, so I'm not addressing that at all. But a loving father who disciplines his child is the best thing you can do. And I'm not saying it has to be physical punishment. But we learn obedience through the things that we suffer, like Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. And we realize that God is the one in control, and I am not. And sometimes it's hard for us to do that. I mean, yeah. Frank?
You're talking about discipline and the good that it does, and the good does down the road. I lived with my grandmother when I was a little boy. My dad was killed in a car wreck when I was just a boy. So I lived with her, and she would grab a peach tree limb and wear me out. And I thought there wasn't a meaner old lady on the whole earth. When I got up in my late teens, I began to realize how good a lady she was.
Yeah. And as a parent of 2 boys, they're different. And the way you discipline one is different than another. And we cannot question the way God disciplines us because he knows us better than we know ourselves. And sometimes, like I had a brother who had to learn the hardest way. I mean, he couldn't learn any other way. Sandra?
Discipline keeps us safe. That's one reason for discipline, is that it keeps us in a safe frame of mind. It also trains us to discipline ourselves as we get older.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And, yeah, we shouldn't question God's discipline. In fact, we sometimes say, God, what are you doing? And the question probably should be, what am I not learning? I might be the thick-headed one, so.
Kevin,
Yes.
we have to have our eyes and minds open so that we know when we're being disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
And not just cast it off as, well, bad luck or whatever.
Yeah.
Realize that we are being disciplined by the Lord, and his ways are not our ways, or our ways are not his ways.
Right. All right, let's go 7 through 13, and Ken is going to read that for us.
It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, We had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed.
Okay. How would you summarize that?
Means what it says.
Means what it says, and it says what it means. Our spiritual, well, any kind of growth is a process. Spiritual growth, and I think that's really what it's saying in verse 9, is that the Father of spirits, our spiritual Father, is on a higher plane than our earthly father. And we know how much our earthly father and mother, parents or grandparents, as Frank mentioned, how they cared for us. And God is so much bigger, more developed, smarter, and all of that. You know, it develops who we are becoming. And that's a large part of what growing as disciples of Christ is, that we learn about Jesus and then we apply that to our lives and live that way. So, the idea of being a legitimate son of God, instead of questioning whether we are sons and daughters of God, we should realize that's affirmation that God cares about us and is looking out for us. And it's not pleasant. Certainly if we are entangled in sin a lot, it's very unpleasant to come out of that. The drug addict, the person who has really bad relationships, the lawbreaker, the one in prison, all those kind of things, the ramifications from sin are very tough and difficult to come out of. But God will get us through it. He will help mature us if we will listen to him and follow him. Wiley?
I think the fathers of our older age, our fathers disciplined according to the way their parents disciplined. You know, if you got beat with a board, well, they got beat with a board.
Mm-hmm.
And you never consider that though when you're getting beaten, you know. But you understand that there is a power that is going to take over when you do something bad. And never think about that until now when we're discussing it. But they probably treated you just like they got treated.
Mm-hmm.
Most generally.
Yes, especially.
There's a new style now of discipline.
Right.
Put you in a corner and stay there for about 5 minutes, everything's gonna be okay.
Most traumatic thing for our son was not that he had to drink water instead of pop or Kool-Aid or something. That would make it straighten up faster than anything.
I had a little foster boy, and he had a problem of discipline, and he liked being whipped. So he had a problem with his feet. So I would have him, I put a place on the wall, and I said, put your nose there. So to reach that, he had to stand up like this to reach it. So that helped his feet.
Alice?
You know, we talk about being disciplined as we were younger. And I remember my mom would say, this hurts me worse than does you, or it's because I love you, and I used to think, well, I wished you didn't love me as much as But now as an adult, I look back, she was working to help us be the adults we should be.
Mm-hmm.
God's working with us because he knows where our eternity is gonna be.
Yeah,
And that's where we want to spend, is with him. And so as we grow along the way, we're going to be disciplined.
right. He is perfecting our faith. He's bringing it to maturity, completion, developing it. And that's what we get to be as grandparents, is our faith is developed, and how we live and demonstrate our faith. Our children and grandchildren are learning from our faith and our example, and how we trust God when it might be the darkest night and looks the most difficult. So it's a time to teach, and be careful what little ears hear, or be inspired by little children and examples you are to others. It's a powerful thing. And that's not saying we can't cry, and that we can't be hurt or disappointed, but we trust God no matter what, because we believe there is a God and he will have the last word.